After Alex Jones was found guilty of defaming the family members whose children were killed in the Sandy Hook mass shooting, a jury in Harris County, Texas, awarded Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis $4.1 million in compensatory damages and $45.2 million in punitive damages. Their son, Jesse Lewis, was shot and killed in the Sandy Hook shooting when he was just 6 years old, and they had to deal with the trauma of their child's loss, but more importantly, on top of that, they were further victimized by Alex Jones and his lies on his programming. Now, one of the attorneys representing Heslin and Lewis was Mark Bankston, who actually had a pretty stunning exchange with Jones on the stand as he was testifying under oath. Let's watch.
Bottom left corner. Is that your phone number?
Yes. So you did get my text messages. And it said you didn't. Nice trick.
Yes, Mr. Jones. Oh. Indeed. You didn't give this text message to me. You don't know where this came from. Do you know where I got this?
No.
Mr. Jones, did you know that 12 days ago, your attorneys messed up and sent me an entire digital copy of your entire cell phone with every text message you've sent for the past 2 years, and when informed, did not take any steps to identify it as privileged or protect it in any way. And as of 2 days ago, it fell free and clear into my possession. And that is how I know you lied to me when you said you didn't have text messages about Sandy Hook. Did you know that?
I told you the truth. This is your Perry Mason moment. I gave them my phone, and then
Mr. Jones, you need to answer the question.
No,
Did you know this happened?
No, I didn't know this happened.
Joining us now is Mark Bankston, the lawyer representing Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is my first televised interview since walking away from that courthouse. And I wanted to come here to TYT, support independent progressive media. I'm sure I'll have to do some corporate media down the road, but I wanted to come talk to you first.
Well, we really appreciate it. And let me just start off by thanking you, not because you're doing the show, although I do thank you for that, but we're living in this era where it feels as though there's never any justice served, where the bad guys get away with all sorts of terrible behavior meant to enrich themselves, meant to profit off of the pain and sorrow and suffering of others. And that moment has gotten a lot of attention because you caught him in such an obvious lie. And it felt good to see him scramble for some talking point in that moment. And so talk to me about how, you explain how you got the text messages to begin with, but what I'm curious about is, why do you think his lawyers didn't step in to ensure that you didn't use those text messages against him, citing attorney-client privilege? They failed to even do that.
Well, I mean, if you listen to Jones's people and his allies, they're now spreading conspiracy theories that gentleman who was a former member of the Eric Holder Justice Department must have done this intentionally and hatched this scheme to somehow destroy Jones. And now, Roger Stone's begging Jones to sue him and everything. But it's just one conspiracy after another. The real truth is, you had a lawyer who was in over his head, doesn't do civil law that much, did not know what to do to take his client's information seriously or how to protect it. So when I got that information and I saw that clock rolling out, knowing that Jones would hit the stand one day after it became free and clear, you just kind of wait and see if he does what he's supposed to do, and he did not. Most trials have a discovery period where these kind of secrets come out, so there are no Perry Mason moments of trial. But when you have a defendant who refused to cooperate with discovery for years, thumbed its nose at the court, this sort of time bomb was just sort of waiting to happen. But it took some real drop in the ball on the side of opposing counsel to allow that moment to happen. And I mean, I get what you're saying about sometimes it just doesn't feel like there's any justice in the world. It sure felt like one in that moment. I take down wrongdoers all the time. I just don't happen to do it on, live TV in front of an audience of millions in a perfect made-for-movie moment. There was a real poetic justice to it.
Absolutely. In fact, what was frustrating was how, as soon as Alex Jones was banned from various platforms as a result of his defamatory statements toward these victims, The conversation in the country immediately devolved into a free speech debate, even though we're talking about private companies that can do whatever they want in regard to their terms of service. They can ban whoever they want. And at the same time, even if we're talking about the government stepping in and violating someone's First Amendment rights, defamation is not protected under the United States Constitution. And it's amazing how quickly certain individuals in this country forget that. They pretend as if defamation is protected. Now,
isn't it funny that some of those same individuals are the ones who threaten frivolous defamation suits every day? And yeah, when the cannons get turned on them, they're singing a different tune.
When you had obtained those text messages, did anyone from the federal government reach out to you to obtain it themselves for the January 6th investigation?
Yeah, everybody's asking me about this. This is the topic that everybody wants to hear about. I've given some preliminary comments on it. I can reiterate those here. I am cooperating with the January 6th investigation. I will cooperate with any law enforcement organization that wants to talk to me. They've made it clear they want them. The judge gave me full clearance to say that that privilege has been waived, and so yes, I am cooperating with them. I can tell you that I can't say much more about the contents of the text as they relate to January 6th, but I do have a few interesting surprises I can share with your viewers if they'd like to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been seeing over the past couple of days is Mr. Jones making a lot of statements about his text message. And I certainly can tell you that reviewing his text messages, I expected him to be in the center of a maelstrom of right-wing figures who are engaged in cabals to take down this country. The fact is, it's just not true. The reality of reading through Alex Jones' text messages is you see a man whose life is profoundly boring and profoundly sad. To see what's going on with him is not fun, and he is not at the center of anything. He is shunned by almost everybody he knows. So there's really nothing like that. I can tell you that Mr. Jones has made some statements about what's in those text messages, and I'll fact check those really quick for you. He said on InfoWars the other day that while I got a hold of these text messages, there are nothing intimate like pics in there. I can tell you that is categorically untrue. That is something I was exposed to. Sometimes as a lawyer, you have to go through materials that you didn't want to see.
Right.
And now those have been redacted so that any member of my staff does not have to suffer the similar thing that I did.
Wait. So it did include that kind of imagery?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yes, it did. I was unfortunately exposed to that. And Mr. Jones can rest assured that I will protect him in that regard. I will not be releasing any of his intimate photos. And I mean, it's not a rare thing for a person to have that sort of thing. So I'm not trying to judge the man, but yeah, I had to be exposed to that. The other interesting thing is that Mr. Jones said that there was an intimate photo of his wife on the phone. That I can also confirm that's true. And I normally wouldn't talk about that in public, but there is a public interest angle into this, is that I'm a little concerned about it because that intimate photo was sent to Roger Stone. And I don't know if that was consensual. And if it wasn't consensual, and Mrs. Wolf Jones should know about that, and there might be something that needs to be done about that. Then again, it could be totally consensual. But when I see that, and I don't see any indication that it was, I'm concerned something might not be on the up and up with that. There are certainly laws in certain states about that. I can tell you that there are only a few household names in those lists. Mr. Jones does not have a deep roster of friends within right-wing spheres. And there are a lot of people he wants to talk to who don't seem too interested in talking to him. But I can tell you another thing about all of that is you do see some interesting things. You see Mr. Jones' employees claiming that they have a back channel to Ted Cruz. They have ways to get information directly into Ted Cruz's hands. And whether they're blowing smoke up Mr. Jones, I don't know, but they certainly claim that they do have that back channel. Otherwise, there's some interesting things in those messages. We're gonna be reviewing them for newsworthiness. We're gonna be working with a nonprofit to be able to do an analysis of that. And anything newsworthy, I can guarantee you we will be releasing to the public. But when it comes to things like personal identifying information, things about Mr. Jones's children, things like that, we are going to protect that with a basic sense of human morality, which I think is more than we could ever expect if my cell phone fell into Mr. Jones's hands.
Wow, yeah, you're absolutely right about that, by the way, that last part. Wow, that is incredible. So I want to back up a little bit and ask you about how you became involved with the victims' families here. What motivated you to provide counsel to these families?
Well, it's a call you don't say no to. I mean, that's just how it is. I actually started on this adventure with Mr. Jones by starting to represent Marcel Fontaine, who was a young man in Boston who was falsely accused of being the Parkland shooter. And what happened there is that his picture had been featured on 4chan, And he was wearing, everybody knows it by now, the threadless t-shirt. That's the Communist Party t-shirt. And it's a joke. It has Lenin and Mao, and they're all like wearing lampshades on their heads and drinking from solo cups. Visual pun on Communist Party. And because some people had been making fun of him on 4chan for that, somebody decided to try to frame him up as the shooter at the Parkland shooting. InfoWars ran with that off of nothing more than off of nothing more than 4chan. And as a result of that, I was connected in with Mr. Fontaine. We were sort of running in the same sort of political circles at the time. I knew he was a young activist, and I agreed to take on his case. When I brought that suit, it was the first major defamation suit against Alex Jones that was going anywhere. You may remember that there was a Chobani suit against him. Mr. Alefantes and Comet Ping Pong was bringing a suit, but Mr. Jones apologized really quickly in those cases, and he did so in jurisdictions where that apology pretty much foreclosed a suit. Not the case in Texas, and in fact, they never apologized to Mr. Fontaine. When I brought that suit and national news broke of it, Neil Heslin called me up. He said, I've been wanting to bring suit against Alex Jones. I'm having trouble finding an attorney who will take him on. I said, you found him now. Let's do it. The rest is history. 4 years of beating that man across a courtroom every chance I got. And now we're sitting on top of a giant judgment.
I love it. I love it so much. You know, one thing that was disheartening was the moment when Neil Heslin was able to testify, and he was looking forward to that moment because he finally got a chance to kind of confront Alex Jones about what he had done to his family. And Alex Jones, of course, wasn't in the courtroom. And then there was some scheduling mix-up where Jones was in the courtroom when Scarlett Lewis testified, and it was powerful testimony on its own. But what I appreciated about that moment was that she called him out on the lies he continues to tell even as this trial is ongoing. Can you discuss that?
That was an interesting moment, and I actually think of all the many, many mistakes that Mr. Jones made in his legal defense and all of that. Walking into the courtroom before Scarlett Lewis continued testifying was maybe the greatest mistake he made. When he sat down in that chair and she could make eye contact with him on the stand, it galvanized her, and she turned into a symbol of righteousness and a symbol of love and understanding and confusion in the face of what Mr. Jones was doing, and it hit hard. He was walking in and out of that courtroom all the time, just showing up whenever he'd want to, accompanied by a ragtag group of security. It looked weird, but when he sat down there and he did that, by then the case was over. The cross-examination of Jones was just a cathartic moment for everybody. That jury completely understood everything that was going on from the moment Ms. Lewis testified. It was powerful, and I think it's going to live with everybody who was in that courtroom.
Something that was shocking was how first of all, the patience demonstrated by the judge really blew me away. She had patience that I don't think most people would have in response to Alex Jones lying under oath, in regard to Jones and his staffers ignoring her rules. And you did a great job in monitoring what InfoWars was up to during the trial, what they were talking about on the show. So can you discuss what you noticed in their programming? Because it is incredible that they're going through this trial. Everyone's focusing on it nationally, and yet they just can't stop themselves from continuing what got them in trouble in the first place.
It was stunning, and I need to give a hat tip here to my consulting expert Dan Friesen of the podcast Knowledge Fight, who I would consider maybe the nation's foremost authority on Alex Jones. And he and his team were monitoring the broadcast during the trial, because I'm in the courtroom, I can't do that. And it's wild to think that during this trial, they had their people on air putting pictures of the judge on fire, calling her a pedophile, saying that the jury is a bunch of blue-collar yokels who don't know what planet they're on, and that's not what we're talking about. There was so much more that happened in the trial. If any of those things happened in a normal trial, that would be the story. But here, there was so much more that those are almost buried in the details. But to actually see that, and talking with the jury particularly afterwards, which they were really willing to talk to us, is they were absolutely mystified that someone would get on and start talking about the trial in that way. I mean, to talk about the trial at all is kind of shocking, but that way, to be able to pull those clips out in the middle of the court to say, you're not taking this seriously. Everything you're doing right now in the courtroom is the same act that you do every single time. And that's why Scarlett was right, is you can sit in this courtroom, you can apologize, you can say you believe I'm 100% real, but the next day you're gonna get on InfoWars and you're gonna say I'm a manipulated agent of the deep state. The same crap keeps on coming. They were telling their viewers that a literal script was being followed for this trial. And a lot of those people believed it.
It's insane.
I can only hope that this really is, it looks like it. I really hope that this is Mr. Jones' exit from the American stage, because even with his reduced reach, his reduced power, all of his fall from grace, he still has command over a frightening amount of people at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And what I'm actually concerned about is I see Alex Jones and InfoWars as a symptom of a broader problem that we're facing in this country. The lack of trust in our media, I think, is justified, to be quite honest with you. I mean, we critique the corporate media on the show regularly, what they withhold from the American public and all of that. And so I'm worried that we're just dealing with a symptom, although we should definitely deal with this symptom because he's victimizing innocent people. He's traumatizing people who've already been traumatized through terrible, tragic events. But at the same time, if we do away with Alex Jones, is that enough to stop all the grifters that exist in the periphery who make money off of, trafficking these lies about people?
No, it's not. And I'm gonna tell you right now, as a plaintiff's lawyer, I'm not here to save you. I can't, I really can't. And we can punish the people who need to be punished. I'm certainly carrying on the fight. Y'all may know that I'm suing on behalf of Imran Alron, who was maliciously defamed by the Daily Caller and Salem Publishing about this IT hacking scandal in the House that was invented out of nothing. And I'll keep pursuing these kinds of things one at a time, throwing those starfish back into the sea. But I think you and I both know the real answer, which is until we have an American government that provides substantially for the material needs and psychological needs of the American people, they will continue to be vulnerable to this kind of misinformation and manipulation. Until that happens, you're right, it's just a symptom of a much, much bigger problem.
So what do you see happening in the future? Because this is just one of several trials that Alex Jones is gonna have to face as a result of this summary defamation judgment. Can you talk a little bit about what the future holds with the upcoming trials and how you see it playing out?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's gonna depend a lot on what the bankruptcy court does and what happens in the next few weeks when we're up there. If it could turn into a full-blown catastrophe for Mr. Jones, the whole bankruptcy could get dismissed, or the bankruptcy could itself turn into a tar pit he cannot get out of that ultimately pulls him down under. Those courts will probably at some point in the very near future refer both of the cases that are pending in Texas back down to trial, as well as the Connecticut case. And those will get tried to a jury. And then we'll either be right back to a bankruptcy court or we'll be going to those state courts to enforce those judgments. And no path on this looks good for Mr. Jones. There's not a road here that is a protected road where he thinks he's gonna get off of a silver bullet. It's not gonna happen. Somewhere or another, depending on what form it's gonna be, there is a massive reckoning to be coming over the next 4 to 5 months. And that's what's almost sort of poetic about it too, is that this isn't going to be a sudden bang or a whimper, right? This is going to be a long process where Mr. Jones slowly and surely deconstructs. And we plan to help that process along. And at the end of it, yeah, we really believe that Mr. Jones will be gone from the American stage.
You seem like a strong person who can withstand intimidation and threats from Alex Jones's supporters. But I am curious, since you are so public and you've made news with the way that you've handled this case, have you dealt with any threats against you or family members?
Oh yeah, constantly. And it was even earlier in the case. There were things happening where Jones or his lawyer Robert Barnes would get on InfoWars and say stuff about me, and then my phone would get filled up because my email's easily accessible. But what really worried me is I ended up getting messages on my wife's phone, on her text messages, which should not be available. In the wake of this trial, I have an email box. Normally when you get out of trial, it's pretty full because you're ignoring your work. This time it's full of every media organization, tons of fan mail, and more crazy people threatening to kill me than you could possibly believe. I've learned though from my clients, those aren't the people you have to worry about, people who send those impotent messages. It's the ones who never send a message. Right. And so I'm being careful, but it's part of the territory that comes with this job. I know one thing is my clients have seen some heat come off of them. This Sandy Hook hoax lie is now buried except for the most crazy people in America. Nobody really believes this stuff anymore. They've moved on to other things. So for them, it's nice to see a light at the end of the tunnel. A light where their life can be more about honoring Jesse's memory than trying to fight for the fact that he existed.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sociopathic what they've been doing at InfoWars. I can't imagine further victimizing people who just lost their children in a shooting like this. And again, I just want to go back to what I opened this interview with. Thank you, because it feels good. Even if you're not personally impacted by what Alex Jones is doing, it feels good to see justice for these families. It's been absolutely heartbreaking. And I really hope that they now have the opportunity to heal and put this Alex Jones part of the tragedy behind them. So final question for you, I guess, is, if you could just change one thing about how this has played out. It's played out pretty well, I'm gonna be honest with you, but it's taken years. I mean, 4 years Alex Jones would not cooperate with the discovery process. If there's one thing that you wish could have been different, what would it be?
Absolutely nothing. That 4 years of contempt and disobedience to the court ended up fully funding all of our expenses that we put forward for the Sandy Hook families. We keep saying, well, we were funded by Soros money or anything. No, we didn't need any of that. We paid for it ourselves up front, and then Alex Jones ended up paying for it. And that process kind of revealed the whole rotten edifice of InfoWars. And for it to conclude in this way, in this poetic of a fashion, I wouldn't change a single thing. And I haven't seen these families this happy ever.
I love it. Mark Bankston, you're doing incredibly important work. Thank you so much for speaking with us and giving us a look behind the scenes. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back on soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you do. Solidarity forever.